Starting it right now. Welcome, everyone. Oh, I forgot to do one thing. Hang on. There we go. Okay. As you can see, female head drawing, but I'm ashamed to admit I have not actually picked up a pencil since the last live stream. So I don't know how this is going to go. I'll be a little bit rusty. We'll find out. There's last week's, which went pretty well. Relatively happy with it. Maybe do without this. And usually, while I wait for some people to show up, I kind of start out showing off the stuff that I drew over the last week. But the term's over, and it's break time. I've got nothing new. But what I do have that might be interesting is a whole bunch of these critique drawings that I've got sitting next to me waiting to be photographed. So if you've ever wondered how those classes work, I mean, I've got like a ton of these from last term. I haven't photographed any of them yet. And, you know, we basically have student drawing and then my version on top. This student did really well. This guy's really good. It was only the feet that I kind of needed to work on a little bit. As you can see, I've got a giant stack of drawings. You know, so like throughout a term, I mean, depending on how full the classes are, I'll produce like at least this much stuff. Maybe more. Anyway, this could go on for a while. As you can see, it is a big stack. But I'm waiting to post this stuff on Instagram because we've got a lot of stuff coming over the next couple months, and I want to wait until we get closer to the time to launch that stuff. And so I want to use these drawings to kind of help promote it. So yeah, so it'll be a while until anybody sees these. Well, anybody else other than whoever's watching right now. Okay, so I don't know, we'll skip ahead here a little bit. I guess my point is there's a lot of these. And so draw a lot is the idea. Because if you want to get good at it, you've got to do it a lot. And don't do what I did and, you know, take a week off. Because then suddenly you'll have to do a live stream. It might be a little bit awkward. But we'll see. I think it'll be fine. So like I said, last week's live stream, and what I'm thinking I might do today is just start with some warm-ups, because I don't usually do that, because I'm usually drawing so much that it's not that big of a deal. But I don't know, it's not going to be the most exciting thing to watch is a problem, just watching me draw some circles and cylinders and stuff, but I'm going to do a little bit of it because I kind of need to, and yeah, we'll see how it goes, I guess. But this is essentially what I would do for warm-ups, right? And I used to do this all the time as a student. I would essentially just draw circles, ovals, or ellipses, however you want to think of them, boxes and cylinders. And the boxes and cylinders I would draw from just every angle I could think of, every angle I could make work. I would just try and draw them just over and over and over. And I use that as warm-ups. And I know a lot of people, like someone was telling me recently, they were like, ah, man, I was drawing at this place and everybody was like, what are you doing for warm-ups? Because everybody else usually does like quick sketch for warm-ups and they start with like 4 or 5 minute poses or whatever. And that's cool, but to me, like you should get warmed up before that. Like the figure drawing isn't really the warm-up, that's the hard part. You know, you don't want to warm up with that. But so I would just literally draw circles and cylinders and boxes and ellipses. You know, how circular can I make this? Not bad. It's okay for not having picked up a pencil for a week, right? Ellipses, you know, I mean, they need to be nice and even. You know, a proper ellipse should be something that can be divided evenly into 4 equal quadrants. You know, something like that maybe. And so these should all be equal. We could flip any one over and they should be about the same if we want to draw a nice clean ellipse, you know. And then we've got to be able to do this from various angles, various sizes. You know, how do we take an ellipse and maybe turn it into a cylinder? You know, this one was a little less even than this one, but I think it's okay. I think it'll still work. And, you know, if you've ever watched me draw at all, I mean, in terms of figure drawings, head drawings, I mean, the basic shapes are just critical. You know, like everything we do is going to be composed of underlying boxes and cylinders to help create those three-dimensional forms, you know. And this is going to help with that. Notice what's going on here, right? The top, the part of the cylinder that's closest to us, that ellipse is more narrow, and the one that's farther away from us is a little more open, right? That's like an artifact, but it's just how perspective works. If we were to actually like draw a horizon line and vanishing points and draw a box and turn it into a cylinder, right? Like the effect that you would get if you worked it all out properly is this, right? The ellipse that would be closer to us is going to be a little more narrow, and the one away from us is going to be a little more open, you know? And so without working it out, you can kind of fudge it a little bit, you know, and make it work. I'm trying to make like a big, there we go, kind of like a open type ellipse here. That's my goal. This probably isn't the most exciting thing to watch, unfortunately. It's unfortunate because it's actually really important. This was like a huge part of my development. I mean, obviously you have to do a lot more than just this, but it's pretty critical in terms of learning how to draw. I mean, just being able to draw these basic shapes and make them work properly is huge. You know, what if we want to draw a box? You know, like how well can you draw straight lines? If you can't draw a nice, clean, straight line, drawing a box is going to be incredibly difficult. You know, and then what type of box do we want to draw? Maybe this one is a narrow, longer type of box. Something like that, maybe. Looks kind of cool. So anyway, this is the type of stuff I would do as warm-ups. And like if you take a class, you know, like a life drawing, figure drawing type thing, and they're going to tell you like, okay, we're going to do 4 5s for warm-ups, you know, and you're going to start out. Personally, what I did in those situations was I got to class early and I sat there for 20 minutes or so before class even started, and I did this kind of stuff. And I just practiced drawing boxes and cylinders. And no, it's not the most exciting thing to watch, but man, is it important. It really is. I mean, this, when you really come, you know, get down to it, this is drawing. I mean, this is like the core, you know, the base of all of it, everything that I do. You know, maybe we're looking up at like a long, narrow type box. And notice we also made these two overlap a little bit, which suddenly adds a lot more depth to the page. You know, so that's another thing that you can practice is overlap. You know, what if we draw another circle behind this one. You know, which one's closer? Well, depends on how they overlap, right? Like at first glance, you would probably say this one because it's bigger. But then if we do this, and this one's closer, and this one's farther away, just based on those overlaps. And now the one that's farther away must be really big to have this appearance to it. Anyway, this is the type of stuff I would do. Again, this is probably a very uninteresting live stream, but in my opinion at least, super, super important. You know, can you draw really narrow ellipses? Can we turn that into a cylinder? You know, maybe something like that. Anyway, that's probably enough. This is working okay, so mostly I just wanted to check and make sure that I was capable of drawing still, because I haven't picked up a pencil for a little while. Also notice that, and might just be me, but there's a lot of classes I've taken, instructors out there that will always tell you, like, you need to be able to draw the circle just with one, like you kind of ghost it in and then you just do one line and that's it. And I don't know, to be honest, it just never worked for me. And I find it much better to do the kind of ghost it a little bit, then drop the pencil, then go over it multiple times, and then make little small corrections each time I go around until it starts looking right. And to me, that really helped like my fine motor control develop. You know, rather than just putting down bad circle after bad circle, for some reason, being able to make these little tiny corrections as I go around really kind of like helps speed up that development, I think. And this is something that I put off for a long time, right? Like I didn't start doing this until I was a few years in at Watts. And, you know, I don't know, like I just didn't want to spend all my time drawing basic shapes. It just seemed kind of boring and not very interesting. You know, I was there to learn figure drawing and head drawing and not necessarily boxes and cylinders. By comparison, seemed quite boring. But then eventually, it took me a while, but eventually I realized that, you know, they were one and the same, right? Like the boxes, the cylinders, directly related to successful figure drawing and head drawing. You know, like these basic shapes are like the core element of all drawing, essentially, at least all representational art. I guess abstract art is a totally different thing. I don't know what's going on with that. But, you know, if we get into representational art, then this is kind of like the base of it, essentially. Okay, this is enough of this. Let's go in and let's try and draw a head. Let's see what happens. So as you can see, she's turned her head very far to the side, but not profile. We're seeing the other eye, just a little bit of it. And so we've got to create a head shape here that kind of matches what we're seeing. Her head is also, this is a tough angle here, right? Because it's not just turned to the side, it's also tilted down a little bit and then also tilted to the side a little bit, right? So, I mean, it's got all three axes going on, right? Like turn to the side, down, tilted to the side. So we've got to figure out how to capture that. And not easy. But we're going to start the same way we usually do. Since her head's tilted down, I'm going to start with that cranial mass shape and sort of tilt that down a little bit. And her cranial mass, it's hard to see because she has a lot of hair, but I don't get the impression that it's a very long type of cranial mass. Like, I think it's like a rounder type shape. Probably something kind of like this. Trying to give a little bit of a tilt. I don't know why it didn't work quite like I wanted to. Actually, I do know why. It's because I haven't picked up a pencil for a week. We'll see. I'll get warmed up more as we're going here. But as you can see, I'm trying to get it to have a little bit of like a down tilt to it here. But still be relatively round at the same time, which is the hard part. Okay, so then we get the front of the head sweeping down this way. You know, and it's going to sweep back pretty far because her head's tilted down, right? So the chin's going to be pushed back a ways. And then we'll have kind of the back of the head, trying to find a nice sweep down into the jaw here. Right, it's kind of sweeping down this way, and then we kind of have the chin somewhere right around here. It's a little rough, not the cleanest lines I've ever put down, but I think they're in the right spot. So I think we're off to a good start. Also, this eraser seems to be leaving marks on the paper, which is a bad sign. You don't want your eraser to leave marks on the paper. If that's happening, then it is time for a new eraser. Let's see if this one's any better. Oh, that does look better. Yeah, much better. Okay, so this kind of swoops down here to the chin. Right, now her ear and the back of her jaw, sitting back here pretty far, right? Pretty close to the back of the head back here. So I'm taking a guess right now, right? We're just making a kind of an educated guess and saying like, I feel like this is sitting back here. You know, and we're leaving space because we can see sternocleidomastoid, you know, that muscle on the side of the neck dropping down from behind the ear. And then I don't think there's much back of the head behind there. So, and we need a lot of space here for her face. So I suspect this is going to be right around here. Again, I'm keeping this kind of light and loose because, at least the ear, like that circle for the ear, because it might need to change. That's definitely a possibility. Now, we need to pick the tilt, right? So again, her head's tilted down, so the center line is going to be also tilted, because as the head, you know, I mean, I don't know if you can see my head, but if we look at it straight on, that center line goes pretty much straight up and down there, like that, right? If I tilt my head down, that center line angles, you know, so we're going to have to figure out how much does it angle. It's going to kind of probably line up with the chin here. And again, right now I'm just kind of taking my best guess, but then I'm going to kind of judge it by comparing it to the reference. I think it's pretty good. It might need to angle a little bit more, but I think it's good enough that it'll work. And keep in mind, I always draw like this big straight line here, but the top of it, like the forehead, if we want like a more of a topographical center line, technically this is going to wrap back around the forehead up here, you know, and then this actually isn't part of it. Okay, so her hairline, I feel like it sits relatively low on her forehead, you know, like she doesn't have like a giant forehead. And also I'm noticing that the angle of her forehead, like where the, how should I describe it? Like where the top plane and then we get like the front plane of the face, and then there's usually like a transition, like a rounded area in between. That area, that rounded area, sits kind of low. You know, there's not like a lot of forehead here above her brow before it starts to wrap around. So we have to kind of take that into consideration. So I think what I'm saying is her hairline sits kind of low. And we also need to figure out the angle of the head, right? Because her it's tilted down, and it's also tilted to the side a little bit. So that's tough, right? So now we have another angle to judge. And it's not like super extreme. In fact, I feel like this angle I just made for the hairline is pretty close. You know, something kind of like that. And then that leaves us with the space for her face. Which we're going to break down into thirds, right? So between the hairline and the chin, we're going to break into even thirds. And again, I'm just going to start by guessing, right? Just taking my best guess here, and then I'm going to measure it and see if it's accurate. And it is actually kind of close. Closer than I expected it to be. Close enough that I feel like we can almost just bring the chin up just a little bit here. I think that's going to work pretty well. So what we've got going on here is, right, the hairline, the brow line, which is about the level at which the eyebrows meet in the center of the forehead. But you have to be really careful because on some people that's not always level, or at least not in line with, I don't know, like some people's eyebrows are uneven, I guess, is something you have to take into consideration. In fact, it's pretty common for that to be the case. You just have to be really careful. Okay, so hairline, brow line, this is the connection point of the nose, right? Which in this case, I think is going to actually sit forward of the center line just a little bit. And then we get the chin, of course, you know. So we'll come in here and start breaking this down a little bit farther. And we'll say we've got the little bit of the glabella section kind of coming down this way. Inside of this eye socket coming down this way. Now, what do we do over here? It's tough, right? This is a really challenging area. I mean, we could come in here and kind of look for, right, how big does the front plane of the head appear to be versus the side? And usually where this is going to fall is kind of like in the middle of the rounded part of the brow. Usually on the brow, we're going to have like a little bit of a flat section, and then it's going to be like kind of rounded a bit. Right, where it's going to like round around this direction. And so that change in plane here, which is not obvious at all on the head, I mean, it's more of a conceptual thing. It's going to sit basically right in the middle of that rounded part of the brow, or towards the front of it maybe. I mean, it really just kind of depends on the person, and it's something that it takes a little getting used to be honest. It's not super easy. So now I'm just kind of looking and saying like, okay, how far is the brow kind of cutting over into the side plane of the head over here? And it's going to go this way. It kind of drops down and back up. All right, get that nice eye socket type shape on there. That's looking pretty good. And then this is tough, right? This area over here, we're seeing just like a little bit of that eye and a little bit of the brow. So I'm going to kind of draw the sweep of the nose and this other eye socket simultaneously because they need to relate to each other like just right. So in that sense, sweep of the nose is kind of coming down this way here. Right, a little bit like that. And again, I'm just going to double check our angle. I feel like it's probably pretty close. And of course, we get a little bit of this brow kind of wrapping around this way. And the nose, well, let's get the brow on here first, right? So the brow bone is kind of protruding outward here. Right, and then it's kind of cutting back in this way, and then we're hitting the eye, right? We're seeing like the ball of the eye, kind of like right in here. Right, just about like that. Somebody wrote something. Gabriel, welcome. B.A. Humdinger, welcome back. Getting the position, getting the eye positions right is the hardest thing for me. It is super hard. Trust me, getting the eyes and this whole brow section, I mean, it took me a long time to get this figured out. This isn't like something that I just figured out like overnight. It took a while. It is not easy. Okay, so back to the nose here, right? So remember, the nose is kind of, it's going to connect down around here. So we've got to come in here and look for like a nice sweep. And we can also see that the tip of the nose, if we use a little plumb line, it doesn't go out past the brow. It's like back a little bit. Right, so it's going to be like kind of down in here. And then the ball of the nose has a little bit of, you know, like that alar cartilage kind of pokes out a little bit. Yeah, the eye sockets are really tough. That was one of the reasons I made that, you know, one of my first YouTube videos when we were doing that little like head drawing type series. I made sure to really get like a good like brow and eye placement type video thing because it is really hard. The nostril is going to kind of sit back here. Kind of like right about in there. That seems pretty good. And then from here, this is tough, right? So we have the eye here. I feel like the angle of the nose might be off a little bit because right now, say we have the brow and then the eye and then the cheekbone kind of starts to come out this way. But I'm seeing much more cheekbone here than I am in the reference. So that means something is off somewhere, right? What is it exactly? Not totally sure yet. Probably the angle of the nose. Or we have a little bit too much brow out here. That could be it. I feel like right now, this drawing will probably work pretty well, even though it's not totally perfect in this area. You know, like we're just getting a little bit more space in here than I'm seeing in the reference and up in here. So essentially, I think what happened is I probably had my center line a little too far this way, right? And again, this is the type of thing that happens if you're not super warmed up, unfortunately. If you don't pick up a pencil for a week, there's going to be some consequences. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sweep the nose out just a little bit farther. I think that's going to help. Make the ball of the nose just a little bit bigger. Aside from that, I don't know. I think that works reasonably well. Right, and then we get our cheekbone kind of wrapping. around this way. And then we hit the chin down here. Just need to get a nice chin type shape on there. Now, keep in mind that we've got to find some thirds here for this bottom section, right? Because so we take this bottom section and we break that into thirds. It's going to look something like that. Again, you can measure them, make sure we're close. Chin's a little large, but I don't know, that feels about right to me for her head. So then from there, right, the tooth cylinder is going to push forward. And that's going to help us get the lips aligned properly. And then the chin is also coming forward this way. Right, kind of like that. We can look for the side plane of the head. It's going to be roughly about here. Right, and then kind of like the flat part of the forehead is roughly in here. Right, so earlier when we were drawing this line, what that is actually the section in between these two parts, right? And it's actually kind of wrapping back like this way, right? And so what's happening is we get a flat section for the forehead, right? And then a rounded part here, and then a flat part again over here. You know, and that's partly what makes drawing heads so challenging, right? Is because they're not boxes and they're not cylinders. And it's very easy to watch a demo where, you know, maybe you watch my demo and I say like, here's a box, here's how we cut the eye sockets out of it. But then you try to do it to an actual head and it's very challenging. And it becomes clear immediately that it's not the same. You know, it's a concept that works in a similar way, but it's very challenging. It's not just something that translates perfectly. Right, and then we've got maybe employ a Riley rhythm in through here. Right, this ear, I don't know, I guess it seems like it's about in the right spot. Check the reference. If I draw a line straight across from the bottom of the ear, it hits roughly the middle of the nostril. It's pretty close. Can shift it up maybe just a little bit here, which is interesting because now I feel like the corner of the jaw is a little bit low if we do that. So we might need to actually change the angle of the jaw here just a little bit as well. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Also, for those of you that were curious, I do actually have a Coke sitting right here. And I'm going to drink it. Also, I just spritzed Coke on my drawing. Coca-Cola, to be specific. So good. Okay, so we've gotten a decent result here so far. We need to get into the features a little bit, right? So let's see if we can find the rest of what's going on with the brow here. Her brow bone, it's hard to see like where the bottom of it is exactly. So like different people's brows work differently. There's also a big fat pad that sits like on the bottom corner of the brow here. On some people that's more pronounced, and on some people it's like almost non-existent. And depending on how much of that is there, it's going to change what the kind of like the fold, or like where the lid kind of like goes up under the brow. It'll kind of change that relationship a little bit. So what I'm going to look for here first is kind of the opening of the eye socket, which is basically the bottom of the brow bone, right? Which I'm going to say is like about here. But then again, on her, that fat pad exists enough that it probably isn't going to be the actual top of the eyelid. The top of the eyelid will probably sit a little bit below that. And I'm going to throw a line in here to find the position of the eyes, or basically the height of the eyes, I guess I should say. Probably right about there. I think that looks pretty good. And again, what I'm looking for is the height of the tear duct specifically. I tried to like run a line, excuse me, too much Coca-Cola. Trying to run a line through where the tear ducts are sitting, right? And if we draw a line that kind of parallels this one here, it should roughly kind of bring us back to where that tear duct sits. And this is kind of where Loomis and I disagree a little bit, in the sense that when you read the Loomis book, he kind of says that you always go from the edge of the nostril back. And in my experience, most people don't fit that perfectly. There are people that do fit it, and those are the types of people that he seemed to draw the most. And so for him, I'm sure that worked out pretty well. But for most people, I don't think that's the case. I kind of like the way I drew the nose the first time. I'm going to adjust it back a little bit. Okay, so our tear duct will be sitting roughly about here. The other one is hidden back behind the nose here, so we can't see it. The mouth, right, is going to be roughly, so this line, right, we broke this into thirds. This line here is going to be the bottom of the top lip. This will be the top of the chin or the bottom of the mentolabial sulcus. Not the bottom of it, but I guess it's the depression that exists at the top of the chin is called the mentolabial sulcus. So there's a couple places we could start here. I could start with the lips, or maybe the nostrils, or the opening of the nostril if I want to be very specific here. And they both are good places to start. I don't know why once I get this far, I never start with the eyes really. I don't know why. I always start with either the nose or the mouth and then kind of work my way back to the eyes. But the eyes are probably the hardest part, so I don't know. It might be a good idea to get them out of the way. Okay, so thinking about our nose anatomy a little bit, we've got alar cartilage up in here. It's going to be kind of wrapping back up around this way, and then we've got the wing of the nostril, and those together are what's creating the nasal opening here. So it's kind of coming up a little bit, back a little bit. It's okay. I'm going to try it again. It seems okay. I think it's off to a good start at least. Now, knowing nose anatomy is really helpful when it comes to drawing these shapes. And again, as a student, I had a really hard time with this. And it was really like, once I really got in there and started studying that anatomy, that it really started to make sense. And it was like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, I see why this shape exists. You know, I understand those cartilages and what they're doing and how they're connecting. And then what happened was, rather than just trying to copy these shapes, I was able to think them through a little bit more logically and start to realize that, you know, there's reasons that they look the way they do. And it kind of lets you start to invent a little bit, really. I don't know if we need that much detail on there. I pushed it too far. I think that's good. Right, and then we get this mouth shape down here. And this is challenging, right? So we're drawing the mouth at a pretty extreme angle. You know, it's not in profile, it's turned back towards us a bit, and it's gonna be a little bit challenging. And so we've got to get the philtrum, usually what I'm gonna start with. And in her case, it's kind of doing this and this, right? Something kind of like that. Then, gosh, this is tough. Okay, so for her lip type, I feel like there's like a really subtle change in direction this way. And then it kind of swoops back this way. Right, a little bit like that. And then of course we hit the node out here at the corner, which on her is pretty subtle. It's a very subtle node shape. And we might even want to play it up just a little bit. But it's basically right about there. But if you're looking at the reference and being like, gosh, I don't know, I don't see it that obviously, you're right, it's not that obvious. Kind of making it a little bit more obvious. And then this just kind of wraps around. And what is happening here is that the mouth is wrapping around to the other side of the tooth cylinder, but her head's so far, turned so far that we're not seeing the other side of the tooth cylinder, right? So we're gonna see a little bit of the philtrum here, or not the philtrum, sorry, the tubercle down here, right? And then we kind of get like the body of the lip, and then this part that kind of gets pulled like tight that way, and then kind of maybe like a little bit of the bottom of the node. And then this part's basically just going to wrap around and connect right back around there. Not a super easy lip position there, right? And then we can add a little bit of that philtrum shape on here. Not philtrum, sorry. Gosh, I'm all over the place. No, that is the philtrum. That's the philtrum up here. Tubercle is this part. Sorry, I just ate 2 cheeseburgers and I'm very full, but it was delicious, so it was worth it. I also started running again today, which also took a lot out of me. And I almost didn't do the live stream. Then I thought, nah, it's not going to set a good example. I need to do it anyway. Tough it out. We'll see how it goes. So we're looking for the bottom lip here. And it's a little bigger than the top one, but not by very much. Very subtle amount.
Got a couple questions for you here.
Oh, cool.
First of all, hello
Olivia
everyone.
is back.
I popped in here for a second. So there are a few questions. The first one is from Gabriel, who asked, what are specific things that make a photo what are specific things that make that photo a good reference to draw from? Sorry, I got tripped up on the second that. And then he asks, is it just clear shadows?
clear shadows is a big part of it, for sure. And that's one thing that's really hard to find. So there's a lot of different types of lighting that you could use. And one of the things that is very challenging to find is direct lighting from like a single source. And that is like specifically how we set up our photo shoots. And it's specifically for learning purposes, right? Like a lot of artists would look at this and be like, oh, that's easy lighting, right? And it is, but that's the whole point, because you're trying to learn, and starting with the really hard complex lighting makes it really hard to learn. And so, yeah, we're going to start with lighting that is a little more simple. I mean, I wouldn't say it's easy necessarily, but it's, you know, easier than, say, multiple light sources, or like really soft light sources. Sorry, that was the train. You know, there's like a lot of different types of lighting out there. There's more like theatrical type lighting. There's just a lot. And so what's hard to find, and partly why we have to do our own photo shoots, is because I looked around at like all the different types of reference that are out there. There's a lot of them that will license, or like, they have plans for like schools and stuff that want to use their reference. And so I looked into it, and to be honest, the lighting, I couldn't find any that had good lighting. There are some that have a single light source, but the problem with them was that it was like side lighting. And side lighting is another thing it's not great. It's better than probably like really complex multiple light sources for learning, but it's just not all that dynamic, because all it does is reveal like it basically puts a shadow along each form, like lengthwise. And that's okay. It's not like a horrible thing to do, but if you can move the light higher up and get it like kind of like above a person, I don't know how to describe it exactly. It's above them and like a little bit forward, and then maybe a little bit off to one side or the other. You can reveal way more form, and you can get more information out of the halftones. You can reveal more shadows. I mean, it just works really well. And in my experience, when I looked around, there was not any place that I could find that had a lot of reference like that. And so we shot our own. And that is the story of our reference. But yeah, it's hard to find good reference, definitely. I forget what the question was. Was it just like...
Oh, he's just asking, why is this good reference, basically?
Oh, that's pretty much it. It follows, like, it's a single light source, and it's positioned above her and just a little bit in front of her. And then also, I don't know, I guess that's it. It's mostly just the lighting. I mean, you could maybe say it's a cool pose because it's turned kind of far, but I mean, that doesn't matter as much.
Okay. Next question is from Martina, who asks, when drawing a human figure, how do you execute both gesture and structure without it looking dark and unclear?
I wasn't paying attention.
Oh, no.
Have to say it again. Sorry.
Okay. So, one more time.
Yeah.
This is from Martina, who
Yeah.
asks, when drawing a human figure, how do you execute both gesture and structure without it looking dark and unclear?
Wow, gesture and structure without it looking dark and unclear. I mean, I guess it depends on where the darkness and unclearness is coming from exactly. To me, that kind of sounds like maybe things are like you're putting too much pressure on the pencil or have too soft of a pencil, because you need to be able to work really light, So you can see these construction lines I'm putting down. They're pretty light, And so this is gesture and structure, but hopefully it's not overly dark necessarily. Like, we need to keep things changeable, right? Because like when you're in the gesture phase and the structure phase, you're just constructing the drawing. So like things are going to be off. They always are. I mean, I've been doing this a long time, and every single drawing I do, there's going to be something off that needs to be changed and corrected. And so if you're drawing really dark lines, they're not going to be erasable or changeable, and you're going to get stuck with them, and then they're going to show through, like, you know, you'll erase them, but you can't erase them completely, and then they show through in the finished product, and it's a bit challenging. So I would say just be really careful. I mean, it could be that you need to use a harder pencil. Like, it depends on what materials you're using also. Like with charcoal, what I'm using specifically, like on smooth newsprint, and I've got like a 6B Wolf's Carbon, which is pretty soft, but I've trained myself to just through pressure sensitivity alone, I can make really, really light marks. I can get a full range of value out of one pencil. But it takes a while to get to the point where you can do that, right? But it's a specific training technique in order to help develop pressure sensitivity and dexterity. But if you're using graphite, then I would say probably use a harder pencil. You know, if in the construction phase, I would use probably, I don't know, an H. Could use a 2H. Could use maybe an HB, but that's starting to get a little bit soft. To be honest, I use HBs, but again, I can just through pressure sensitivity control it really well. But when you're starting out, that's not going to be the case. You know, I mean, you're not going to have as much control. And so, yeah, I guess that would be my answer. I'd have to see it, honestly, to know exactly what you're talking about in terms of what is making it too dark and too, how'd you describe it? Without looking dark and unclear. As far as unclear goes, I mean, part of what will make a drawing look unclear is if you don't have a clear idea of what it is that you're doing on each step, right? Like the way that I draw and the way that I teach drawing, it requires a plan ahead of time and having like a very specific approach that you're going to use and thinking through every single mark that you're going to make before you make it. Right? Like when you watch me draw this, there isn't a single time that my pencil hit the paper and did something without knowing ahead of time exactly what that thing was. I knew where that line was going to start, where it was going to stop, what type of line it was going to be. Is it going to be a C curve, an S curve? Is it going to be a straight? How curved is it? Is it going to be a subtle curve, an extreme, more extreme curve? You know, all of that has to be considered ahead of time. So if you're just kind of like sketching around and guessing, yeah, things are going to get messy, you know, and there's a place for that. You know, like if you're doing figure invention, then you're going to have to do more of that and do like an exploratory type phase to kind of create the pose. And that, yeah, things will get messy. Like if you go look at gesture, you know, like the way I do gesture specifically kind of skips that step because the way I teach is always from photo reference because as an instructor, like we need to have a common goal. You know, so like, and I've taught some figure invention classes, but I don't know. I plan on doing more in the future because I wasn't super happy with them. But what we need is a common goal, essentially. And so if you're just kind of making things up and everything's kind of scribbly and hard to see, as an instructor, that's really hard to evaluate because I don't know exactly what you were going for. It's hard to know. And so if we're working from reference, when you're in that like beginning stages of learning, it gives us a goal and it says like, oh no, okay, no, we're drawing ahead. It's at this angle. It's got this tilt. And then I can evaluate what you're doing like more specifically and give you feedback that's more helpful. And yeah, and then it'll help you progress. And eventually, hopefully, that will help you get into invention more, you know, in the sense that, you know, the way we're working, even though we're working from reference, we're still working with manipulating basic shapes and constructing things from the ground up. You know, we're not just trying to copy what we see, we're trying to think of these things as three-dimensional forms on the page that we can move around and change. And once you get pretty good at that, then making that transition over to invention becomes easier. I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's easier and much more possible than it is otherwise. And yeah, I don't know. Hopefully that answers your question. I don't know. I kind of forgot what the question was. But hopefully that helps. Somehow I ended up here with a really big forehead on her. Don't know what's up with that exactly. Let's get a hairline on here. That might be a good idea because right now I feel like I have a lot more cranial mass up here than she does. I'll also take a quick measurement here, because I suspect, yeah, she has like a slightly small forehead, like compared to the bottom 2/3. So we can probably drop this just a little bit lower. So this is kind of what I'm talking about, right? Like, and again, admittedly, part of this is just because I'm not warmed up and I haven't drawn anything since the last live stream because I've been kind of busy with stuff. So that's my fault. But, you know, if I wasn't keeping this nice and light and very changeable, then this would be much, much more difficult to correct and change. Get a shape on here that feels more like what I'm seeing in the reference. Okay, and then her hair is kind of like sitting up around here, which I'm going to keep nice and soft. Hairline needs to be very soft. And it's going to drop down this direction. And it's going to swing back this direction. And then we hit some sideburn over here. Just going to sit right about here. It feels okay. Part of what's going on here, why this is feeling a little bit odd, is because I have too much space out here, right? And it's pushing that section out a little bit too far, right? So if we wanted to, I think we could actually pull that in a little bit. Pull this in a little bit here. Pull this back a little bit. All right, pull this eye back in a little bit farther. And we can keep the cheek probably in the same spot. That's probably a little bit better. You know, and then of course we have to adjust this little line that we put in here. Oh, it's a little bit better. Let's see if we can. Pull that out just a little bit. That's a little bit better. That feels a little bit more like her forehead and brow. Okay, let's see if we can get a little bit of her neck on here. right? So we can see a sternocleidomastoid very clearly, kind of dropping down this direction from behind her ear, right? It's kind of coming down this way. And we can see a little bit of the bottom plane. Not the bottom plane, but I don't know. Yeah, I guess the bottom part of the jaw kind of cutting across this way a little bit. Kind of doing that. And she's got her head turned to the side, so we're getting a lot of like overlap happening here. Right? So it's hard to see exactly, but the rest of her neck is kind of like way in here. And back here. Right, kind of like that. Right, and then we'll have a little bit of the trapezius showing, kind of making like a little negative shape right in here. And the rest of that has to be back in here somewhere, kind of like underneath her robe. Be over here somewhere maybe. Remember, the neck is a cylinder, right? Couldn't hurt to get a nice cylindrical shape on there just for construction purposes. I don't want to draw the whole robe, but I did want to get a little bit of neck on there just to make sure this is all kind of reading the way it should, sitting the way it should. You know, and I'm guessing there's probably a little bit of skull popping out back here. We can't see it, it's covered in hair, but I would guess that it's probably there. And let's see, oh, somebody wrote something. Ah, somebody wrote, thanks, very helpful. Martina, oh, you're welcome. I'm glad that helps. Hola, Brian, ¿cómo estás? Yeah, I don't know. I can see they wrote something, but it's far away.
Okay.
It's hard to read.
Okay, I will read it. Okie doke. First off, a quick hello to Joseph Garcia. Hi, Jojo.
It's Joseph.
And Brandon and Will say hi. Awesome. Hello, everyone.
Oh, super cool. The 1 week where I have not drawn anything for a week.
Well, it's looking good so far.
Oh, that's good.
And I'll read your question in just a second. I want to read Constantinus first, who says, hi, Brian. How are you today? In Spanish. And I won't butcher that in Spanish. So how are you today, Brian?
I am doing very well.
Full
I
of
started
cheeseburgers.
running again today, and then I went to In-N-Out and ate 2 double cheeseburgers. So I'm doing pretty good.
Nice. Awesome.
Also
And
have a delicious Coca-Cola to drink.
good.
Yeah.
Getting amped up there. So Constantinus asked, when I draw the lips, do I make the M shape for the upper and lower lips? And does the pit of the mouth align with the eye corneas?
The pit of the mouth, is that what I said?
Yeah.
I would guess that
you
means
mean
the
corners?
node.
Oh,
Yeah, I
like
would
the
guess you're
node.
talking about this
Oh,
part
okay, gotcha.
here.
Yeah.
That can align with the corneas. It depends on the person. And in this case, to me, it looks like it goes back a little bit farther. But like as a general rule, like when you learn all those little rules, like the corner of the mouth aligns with the center of the eye, you know?
Looking for it on your face.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is the rule, right? But then, as usual, everybody's a little bit different. Nobody's hits those rules perfectly 100% of the time. And so, yeah, that's what I would say about the node. And in this case, yeah, again, it sticks back a little bit farther. So as far as the M shape, again, that's another thing. It just really varies from person to person quite a bit in terms of how much of that you're seeing. and what it's going to look like. How extreme will it be? Was it going, like, there's a lot of different lip shapes, right? So that M, I'm guessing you're talking about this part, right? And everybody's going to be a little bit different, right? So if we're looking at lips, that part could go this way, right? It could go like that. It might go, you know, kind of like that. It might go this way, you know, more like that. It might go like this direction. It might be more rounded and then kind of go like that. It might, I mean, there's just so many different variations. Every single person is going to be different. And so that's, again, one of those situations where you kind of learn some of the general rules, but then as you get better at them, you have to start to evaluate the person that you're trying to draw and what type of likeness you want to capture and figure out, like, okay, this person's lips specifically, they kind of go this way, right? And this way. And then how big is the tubercle, right? So I'm guessing by the, you know, you're talking about like the bottom M, which is kind of like this little bottom part down here. This is the tubercle. On some people, it's very pronounced. And on some people, it's not. Some people, it's very flat and almost non-existent. On her, it's pretty flat, right? Like when I zoom in on the reference and really look, I actually exaggerated that quite a bit because, I don't know, I thought it made a cool lip shape. But in reality, her lips are, you know, like that bottom part is a little flatter than that. So we need to get a little bit more overlap on here. You know, and the way those overlap is really critical for lips, you know, especially 3/4 lips. Like if we're, again, drawing a lip like this and say we have like our 2 cylinder shape and then like a line for where those lips are going to go, you know, we're going to end up with that philtrum shape, which is going to sit right in here. And again, this is going to be different on everybody. In this case, her lips do this, but everybody's different. Like there's just no way to know exactly ahead of time what they're going to need to be, right? And then they're kind of coming out this way, and then we're hitting that node section out here, which is kind of sitting out this direction. And then they're kind of going out and wrapping around this corner and kind of wrapping around this way. You know, and then we get the tubercle section on the bottom, which is going to be down here. And since they're in perspective, right, notice I'm taking this part and pushing it back a little bit to help show that this part is kind of tucked back in this way. You know, and then we'll get the bottom lip kind of pressing up against here a little bit. And then we get like this part that gets kind of pulled tight. And then we get kind of like the bottom part of that node. And then this is really important. This out here, if we're drawing 3/4 lips, we have to get this little overlap right in here working just right, right? Like it comes out like this way. You know, so we can see the tubercle overlapping the bottom lip overlapping the far part of the top lip over here. And it's a very kind of complex, I don't know, interaction that has to exist right there, and it has to be just right. Because remember, overlap is what creates depth in a drawing, you know, so we've got to have everything overlapping perfectly. You know, we get that philtrum shape on there. You know, maybe something like that. If we had a contour line, right, it would be kind of coming down this way, wrapping back around this direction, and then popping back out and around that way. So hopefully that helps. I forget what the question was exactly, but...
He was asking about how to draw the M shape for the upper and lower lips, and then does the pit of the mouth align with the eye corneas?
So my recommendation would be to study the anatomy a little bit and really figure out what is the philtrum, right? How does that work? How does that align with the nose, you know, and kind of connect to it? How does the tubercle work? How does the body of the lip work? How does the node work? And once you learn each of the parts, then it'll be a lot easier to go in and evaluate an individual person and look at them and say like, okay, how do we change these to kind of match what we're seeing a little bit more?
I have something to add to that actually about
Yeah.
likeness specifically. So remember what Brian just said about the kind of like the generic face having those two nodes aligning with the corneas. So if the corners of the mouth, can you point on your face, Brian, to like what part of the mouth that is aligning with? See how that aligns with his corneas. So if that's the generic, when you're looking for a likeness on a person, you want to almost like use that as a point of reference to compare them to. So like if it's wider than that, how is it a lot wider than that, or like just a little wider than that? And like comparing a person's face to the generic face, almost like a Loomis head would be an example of like the most generic face that almost no one looks that generic. But if you use that as a point of reference, it kind of helps you to gauge how to draw the features to get a likeness of that individual person.
Likeness is hard.
Does that make sense to you, Brian?
Yeah.
That's basically like the thesis of this book. That's why I pulled this out if you want to like show this to them.
Oh.
This book has the best explanation of how to draw
caricatures.
It's about caricatures, but like specifically how to draw likenesses. It has like the best explanation of it that I've ever been able to find.
I've actually never looked at this book before.
It's a good one. The drawings in it are good, but like the description of how to analyze features and how to draw a likeness is really, really good. So anyone listening, if that's something that you struggle with, I would highly recommend this book. Even if you're not doing caricatures or cartooning.
This is what you were just talking about. The eye is equal to the corner of the mouth.
Yeah, but most people aren't going to be exactly there. They're going to be a little bit narrower or a little bit wider. And you're kind of like using that as your baseline to then sort of judge, you know, how does that person, how are they unique? Like, how are their features differing from the generic?
Yeah, in fact, kind of what they're showing here. Yeah, this is cool.
Yeah, it's gold. I'm not even kidding. That book really helps a lot. And the drawings are cool, you know, but even if you're not into cartooning and you want to apply those same ideas to more realistic representational art, it's kind of like the ideas underneath would apply to anything, you know, any type of likeness.
Cool.
Yeah. There you have it.
There you have it.
Okay, so next we have some thank yous. Oh, you're welcome to everyone who said thank you.
You're welcome.
Then we have Joseph's question is next.
Nice. Joseph.
Joseph asked, how has the percentage of geometric structure versus organic shape feel developed in your teaching/training journey?
Man, Joseph hitting with the hard questions.
Oh, man.
Dang.
Back to you, Brian. No, I'm just kidding. Do you want me to read it again? How's the percentage of geometric structure versus organic shape feel developed in your teaching/training journey? So I think he's asking more about like the analytical side of your drawings versus the more...
I mean, my drawings certainly started out much more generic and analytical, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, over time, they've become more organic, but all of that is like layered on top of that kind of like analytical geometricalness, if that makes sense. So like it took a long time to get to the point where I can get things looking a little bit more organic. And basically, almost everybody has to go through this. Like you go through what, you know, at Watts they would always call the generic phase, where you reach a point where you can draw a head competently, but it's a very generic type of head. And there's no, you know, it takes a while to get out of that. And the reason for that is usually because you start figuring out, you know, like, okay, break it into thirds. You're looking like at basic shapes and how do those sit in space. And what you end up with usually is something that looks kind of generic, you know, and yeah, it's correct. It's technically correct. And it's, you know, not like bad necessarily, but, you know, I spent a lot of time in that stage. Partly, I think, because I was teaching all the time, which is a little bit unique, I think, in the sense that I was like learning and teaching at the same time, which is a little odd. And I was always analyzing stuff because that was how I taught. I taught like the analytical aspects of drawing, really. And it took a while before, I don't know, things kind of caught up and I got good at the drawing part. I was really good at the teaching part first before I was good at the drawing part. I was really good at explaining things. But part of that is just my own personality, I think, because I'm a very, I don't know, logical type person, I guess. And it really lends itself towards teaching, but, you know, it led to years of very kind of generic, technically accurate, but not very interesting drawings. And it really wasn't until these last couple of years that I think my drawings got a little bit more interesting, to look at. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but yeah, certainly like the more organic feel to my drawings came much later and through much practice. And dexterity, I feel like, had a lot to do with that, partly just experience and dexterity and kind of developing the ability to control my line work more and to create more subtle line work, you know, like things like just this little line that I just made right across here. It's a very, very subtle curve, you know, same thing like this, very subtle curves. This right here, like I would have had a hard time doing that even just a few years ago. And it really helps things feel a little bit more realistic and interesting, you know, as opposed to everything just kind of sitting like on the same, I don't know, plane or something, not plane, but like everything being more kind of made out of straights or like more extreme type curves, I guess is kind of what I was doing before. And as usual, I'm drawing this eye probably too big, which I know I draw eyes too big. And to be honest, I think they work well as drawings, which is why I don't work super hard to fix this habit, because I actually like it. But it's also something as an instructor that I have to be really aware of and make sure to point out to people, because, you know, the idea with this type of training is that we want to keep everything as like constrained to realistic proportions as possible. And then that kind of creates a baseline, right? So as a student, you'll kind of learn to draw more realistic proportions. And then when you go out and start studying on your own and doing your own work, and say you want to draw comics or do illustration or whatever, you know, then you can go in and exaggerate things more accurately once you kind of understand how things look when they're not exaggerated, you know. And so that's kind of what this would set you up for, is to be more successful with that. So I always try and point out that my eyes, they tend to be a little bit big. And I think that comes from the fact that I always wanted to draw comics. At least when I was younger, that was kind of what I wanted to do. And not really what I ended up doing. I'd like to someday. Get that eye to sit in here. Right, get the iris, pupil in here. You know, I mean, that alone is a challenging thing to do. First, you got to be able to draw a really, really nice oval. Then it's got to have just the right amount of tilt to it. And then we're only drawing part of it, which I could draw the whole thing, right? We could draw the whole oval and then erase the parts we don't need. That's definitely an option if you need to do it. It's not easy though. This up just a little bit higher. Dang, yeah, it does feel pretty big. We'll see. I'll keep going with it for a minute and then we can shrink it if we need to. Big, and it might need to move over just a little bit. But like I said, this is kind of what happens if you don't draw for a little while. You know, I debated about whether I should do this live stream or not. I decided to go with it just because, honestly, I think it might be good for people to see that if you don't draw for a little while, you kind of lose the ability to do it a little bit. It takes a little while to come back. Which unfortunately is just the way it is. It's amazing how quickly that dexterity can kind of go away, you know? Okay, so this other eye is going to be pretty challenging, right? Like we're only seeing a little bit of it and it's very turned to the side. We've really got to get it on there like just right. And essentially, let's kind of lighten this a little bit here. What's happening here is it's going to come out and around and back down, right? It's going and wrapping around the ball of the eye. And then the ball of the eye is sitting a little bit farther back inside of here. Right, kind of like that, and then we get the bottom part coming back up that way. And then the bottom lid, of course, is doing the same thing, wrapping around, kind of back up that way. And then we're going to be seeing up into this top lid a little bit. You know, and again, it's all about understanding three-dimensional shapes and how to get those aligned just right. You know, kind of sits in there about like that, which this could be a little better probably. You know, and then again, we're seeing a little bit of that iris right in here. What's interesting is like earlier I pushed that brow back in a little bit more, and now that I'm drawing this eye, I feel like it's pushed in a little bit too far, which is interesting. I'm going to actually move it out a little bit. I'm going to say the ball of the eye needs to move out that way a little bit. Which is going to push our eyelid out just a little bit farther here. Seems a little bit better. And of course, there's a little bit of iris, or sorry, pupil up in here as well, but this whole eye's in shadow, so we're not actually seeing any of that. But it would be up in there, if we could see it. Seems okay. It's a little better. Right now, she's got a little bit of like the fat pad that sits underneath the brow bone on her kind of hangs down a little bit and kind of like hangs over the eyelid. So we can try and get some of that in here, right? And what I'm noticing here is we can kind of change up this shape a little bit and try and capture just a little bit of that pad kind of wrapping around the lid, and then the brow bone kind of comes out from under there. I maybe made a little bit too extreme, but I think you get the idea. That's looking pretty good. So essentially what we're looking for, right, is the idea of how is the lid wrapping around the ball of the eye? You know, so in this case, the eye is turned to the side. So the tear duct is like here, right? And then we're seeing the lid wrap out and around the ball of the eye this way. And then we're picking up, again, the actual eyeball in here, right? Kind of like that. And then the bottom lid wrapping up into here and kind of connecting into like tear duct up around here, which I guess would be probably more like this. And then the bottom lid wrapping around that way. So we get bottom lid, top lid. Doing something like that. Right, and then we're seeing the lid sort of wrap around this way, and then we're getting tear duct up in here. Right, so that's the idea with that eye, but keep in mind now the nose is blocking part of it, so we're only seeing like that little front part. But that's what we're looking for, is those three-dimensional shapes. So the brow bone would be kind of wrapping in this way. This would come out, back in, across the ball of the eye, over the thickness of the lower lid, and then down, and then out over the cheekbone, you know, or I guess her cheekbones are more pronounced, so I guess it would come out like that way maybe. So that's kind of the idea, only hopefully you don't have to erase and change it a bunch of times. You guys are going to get tired of me saying this, but I have not picked up a pencil for a week, unfortunately. I've been busy making workbooks, actually. Making workbooks and planning YouTube videos. Anyway, that's kind of the idea. So then we need eyebrows, right? Eyebrows are important. We looked a little bit strange without them. So that's another area where we need to really kind of like design things a little bit, you know, and we can't necessarily just copy what we're seeing. we're going to have to kind of look for some good starting positions, which in this case, this kind of comes up over and we hit eyebrows starting right about there. Remember, they're going to start right on this third line, you know, that brow line that we made earlier. And then the other one, where does that one start? Well, it's just above kind of this part of this nostril. So I'm going to say right about there. And it's kind of sitting like this. You know, they're going to sit on there about like that. And then we just kind of figure out a good eyebrow shape, you know? And again, this is something that is absolutely different on everybody. And yeah, there's a bunch of like generic eyebrow shapes you can learn and study, and I would recommend doing that. But at the end of the day, once you've studied those, then you got to figure out how to change them and modify them to fit whoever it is that you're trying to draw. And it is never as simple as just using that generic eyebrow shape. So in this case, I feel like her eyebrow kind of does this, right? It has kind of like a roundedness to it here a little bit, and then it kind of pops up. And then it kind of cuts back across this way. And then it drops back down this direction. Right, and so we can kind of maybe figure out exactly what this is going to look like back here. And then this part kind of cuts in this way. Now, there's one thing that's not quite right here. And that is that right now the eye is too close to the eyebrow. Part of that I think is because I drew the eye too high. And then part of that is because I drew the eyebrow too flat. You know, so we'll make another attempt. Try again. It's not nothing too complicated about it. Also, I'm going to do this and this. Right, now, when you go into like render eyebrows and stuff, you don't want hard lines on them necessarily. Pull this in a little bit. You know, but when you're thinking of them as shapes, they need to be very clear shapes. I think that's a decent shape. Kind of looks like her eyebrow. Not perfect, but again, part of the problem is I drew the eye too big, and it's probably a little bit high. I'm going to go with it just because we don't have time to redraw everything a million times. I think it looks reasonably okay. And then this one's just kind of going up and over and wrapping around the other side here. There's not much to this other one. You know, we just need to show it kind of protruding and wrapping around. Oh, I think it needs to sit a little bit higher. So keep in mind, if you haven't drawn for a little while, this is very possible that you might need to make a few attempts at things and make little adjustments here and there, and it's not going to go perfectly. I wish it would, but The truth is, if you don't draw for a week or whatever, or more, then you're going to get rusty kind of quick. I think that's looking okay. Right, and then let's see if we can get, let's see. Sorry, people wrote stuff, but the computer's far away. It's hard to read. Says, thank you, Olivia. I'm sure Olivia would say you're welcome. And let's see, Jay, thanks for doing these live streams. You're welcome. David Rodriguez, do you always divide the face in 3 parts when drawing a face with this kind of angle? When I do, I don't know why, but the features of the face doesn't fit. I always have to make the face longer. Yeah, that can happen. And yes, I do this. I mean, it's mainly for teaching purposes, right? And so, like, if I were just drawing a head on my own, would I take the time to divide it into thirds? Actually, yeah, I probably would. So yeah, I guess that answers that question. Yeah, I would break it into thirds. But the problem is, if you're having to make the face longer, then something somewhere is going wrong, right? And it's, my guess would be that it's in constructing the big shape of the head. Because when we're drawing this stuff, it's so critical. Like, every step has to be just right. And if it's not, then you have to end up, like you said, go back and adjust things to make it work. And that can be really frustrating and challenging, you know? And so one of the hardest parts of drawing heads, at least for me, is the very first step, which is crazy because it seems like it should be the easiest. But just constructing this big shape of the head is very challenging. And especially when it comes to capturing likeness, right? One of the things that took me a while to figure out as a student was that likeness starts from almost like the very first line we put down on the page, right? When we construct that big shape of the head, that's kind of almost where the likeness starts. If that's off, then the whole thing's going to be off, right? So when we come in here and try and look for that big head shape, from the very beginning, I'm thinking about what is her head type, right? Like, I don't know if you saw the beginning of this or not, but that's kind of what I was talking about. Like, her cranial mass, like, different people have different sized cranial masses. You know, some people have very long cranial masses, some are more circular. Hers is like the more circular type, you know? And then from there, we also have a tilt. So now our construction line here is going to have a more extreme angle to it to account for that tilt, right? And then rhythmically, I want to sweep the back of the head down through the jaw. So then we're judging essentially the angle of the jaw here with this line and looking for a nice rhythmical connection. And it's basically wrapping like down around this way, kind of like that. And then we get the chin essentially right in there, right? So that stage is critical because everything builds off of that, you know? And so that has to go right from the beginning. And that's one of those things where, like, at first you kind of figure out like a generic way of doing it, but that doesn't really work in terms of likeness and accounting for different head types and different people and different, all that stuff, you know? So like already at this point, this should match her head. This should start to capture her likeness a little bit. And it's very easy for that to be off. And it takes a long time to get to the point where you can hit that perfectly. And there's no reason you should be able to do that perfectly right away because it's very hard. And as a student, at least in my case, for a long time, I was doing what you did, right? Where I would draw my basic shape, work on it, and then eventually I would realize, wow, this isn't working. And I'd have to go back and make a bunch of little adjustments here and there. And I would do that repeatedly over and over until eventually I got everything in the right spot. And then over time, the more times I did that, you know, it started getting a little bit easier and started getting things in the right spot a little bit earlier. And eventually it all just kind of started to work. And I got a better feel for how these head shapes work, you know, and what they look like from different angles. You know, what does it look like when you're looking at someone straight on versus like a 3/4 view versus, I don't know, various What else? Profile, extreme 3/4. If you're looking up at somebody, down at somebody. I just taught a head tilt class this last term, which was pretty challenging. I mean, I've done those drawings before, but I never taught a class like that. It was really cool. You can see, you know, like stuff like this, right? Like drawing a head like that. Not easy, you know, and it works exactly the same way as these and capturing that head shape, but even in a more complex way where now we're taking the cranial mass and tilting it like way back, you know, and figuring out how to like connect everything to that. And it's not an easy thing to do. I've got more of them in here. There's one tilted down. I also taught a Bridgman class, foreshortening class, which was really cool. You know, another head tilted back. But this starts the exact same way, right? Like I started with that cranial mass shape, only you have to be able to visualize it. Like, what are we doing, right? Like we have this cylindrical form, or not cylindrical, but like a big, I don't know, almost like a football type shape or a sphere, depending on the person, you know, tilting it way back and then figuring out like now we're looking up at the jaw and you can see those same thirds are there, but now they're like modified because we're looking up at them in a really extreme way where you can see that perspective starting to happen, you know, and it's challenging. But to answer your question, yes, I would draw those thirds each time. And if they're not working, I would encourage you to figure out why, you know, and figure out like what was it about that initial head shape that you drew that is causing them to be off. You know, was the center line in the wrong spot? Was the angle of it off? You know, there's like so many different little variables that affect that stuff that it's really easy for things to not line up properly.
Okay. Did you happen to answer the question from Celsius?
What did Kelsey say? I don't know.
About the paper?
No, I didn't know there was a paper question.
Okay, here we go. So earlier, Celsius said, "Hey guys, I have 2 questions about the smooth newsprint paper. I got mine from Amazon and it's very wrinkly. Do you know why that is?" And he asked a little bit later, because we missed it, he said, how do you store your papers when you're done? I got some smooth newsprint from Amazon and it's rather wrinkly and don't know why.
I don't know. I'm curious, I guess, what brand you bought. Because that could make a difference. Because the stuff, like, depending on what you buy on Amazon, I mean, they sell all sorts of different newsprint. I've bought paper on Amazon plenty of times. If you're buying, like, a big pad of, like, 500 sheets of smooth newsprint, and it's, like, some generic brand or, like, that Paycon brand, that can be pretty inconsistent and not great at times, unfortunately, even though it's cheap. Which a lot of people still use it because it's cheap and it works. I mean, you can make it work. It's good enough. But you'll get things like that where it might show up really wrinkly. It might get messed up during shipping. There's all sorts of things that can happen to it. And usually, though, if you stick with like the brands like ProArt, or I've been using Seth Cole lately, but you can't get it on Amazon. Seth Cole stuff, I don't know why. There's only one website that sells it. It's like some weird drafting supply website. I don't know what the deal is with that. But it's pretty good paper if you can get it. And then, so that I think would play a role because I've tried those like kind of like economy packs of like newsprint. And I have bought some in the past that were usable and okay. And then I've bought a bunch of them in the past that are just not great and they just don't work well for what we're trying to do, unfortunately. But it really just depends. And it would be tough to know if you can write what brand it was, like if you know, that would be helpful. As far as how to store it, I just keep it in the pad. If it comes in a pad, I basically, like I've just got a whole bunch of them stacked up over here. They're just in the pad, stacked up on top of each other. If they get really old, they might start to turn yellow depending on the brand and I don't know, various things. I don't do anything special to store them, really. The humidity, depending on where you live, the humidity and how dry it is outside, like either how humid or dry it is, can play a big role in the paper. And there are times, because we live in Southern California, and there's times where we have like really, really dry weather. And I've noticed my paper will wrinkle up during dry weather. It'll get like wrinkly and a little bit rougher. And then the weather will switch back to being less dry, and then it'll just go back to normal. And it'll be fine. So that could be part of it
like
also.
SpongeBob.
Yeah, it's like SpongeBob. Yeah, it's SpongeBob paper.
All right. We have another question from Gabriel. I think this is Gabriel.
Gabriel.
Who said, Brian, I'd love to see you drawing the Asaro head, if that's something you recommend learning. There's an Asaro head.
I do recommend it. I have one
right
right
behind
I
Brian.
have one right here. I don't know if you
Oh,
can
it's
see
a
it on the
little
screen.
out of frame.
No.
Can you reach it?
I got it. This guy. Bam. I got one. I draw it for my head fundamentals class. We have a week where we draw this guy, and it is hard to draw. But that might be good. That might be a good live stream idea. Is an Asaro head week. It could be cool. And usually what I try to show with that thing is kind of a combination of like all the rhythms and head construction that I use, which comes from several different sources, a little bit Riley based, a little bit Loomis based, and a little bit my own idea about things, all kind of combined. But then I'll show how to take that and add all those Asaro planes on top of it. I wonder if I have one of those in here. No, I don't think so. I just cleaned out my drawing pad. This is all from this term. Yeah, I don't have one here. But that's usually what I do is I'll start with my basic head construction, throw like some rhythms on there, right? Like some of those Riley rhythms where you get like, you know, we have this one, and then Riley will have one that goes like here. I don't want to draw it on here because it's going to age her a lot. But there's basically one here, and then there's a bigger one that goes out here, like these two like ovals. And then we can take those Riley rhythms and actually build all those little like Asaro planes on top of them. And the way I do it, the Asaro head has some really strange proportions to it. And so the way I do it, I try and stick more with like the proportions I would typically use for a head, and then turn it into like an Asaro type head. But it would have slightly different proportions. You know, it would be more proportions that I'm used to. But that's a good idea. And yes, I recommend studying it, but like, I don't know, it just depends on what you want your drawings to look like. You know, like I look at Instagram a lot, and there's an artist on there that I see all the time named Oliver Sin. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. I don't actually know how, but he's really good like portrait type artist. And it seems like, from what I can tell, the way that he draws the head is he just memorized the Asaro head. It seems to me like he just drew it over and over and over from every different angle to the point where he had it like completely memorized. And then he eventually gained the ability to take that information and tweak it and bend it to fit different people and different head types. And it's really cool. You know, personally, it's not how I would want to work, but he makes really cool drawings. I mean, if that's the type of drawing you want to do, it seems like a good approach, for sure. You know, if you like his work and you're like, hey, I want my work to be like that, I'm pretty sure that's what he learned and practiced. And this is tough. She's got a lot of hair up here. So I'm going to try and draw it, but I also try and make it a little bit smaller just so I can fit it on the page. I'm running out of room up here. Yeah, draw the Asaro head. It's good practice, but keep in mind, it is very hard to draw. It is a challenging thing to draw. It's not easy. And, You know, you have to keep that in mind while you're drawing it, because if you're newer, you know, I mean, I don't know exactly what skill level you're at, but if you're newer and you're trying to draw it, you're going to find it very challenging and most likely incredibly frustrating. And that's okay. You know, I mean, it's good stuff to practice, but just keep in mind that it's going to be hard. I don't know. There's no way around it. The Asaro head is a very challenging thing to study and draw. So I'm kind of shrinking this part up here a little bit. Again, just to try and get it to fit. Get it to fit a little bit better. And this really isn't how I would draw like finished hair. I would consider this to be like notes about what the hair is doing, right? And then if we had time, we can go back in here and really draw it. But mostly right now, I'm trying to just figure out the direction that things are going and how they're wrapping around and connecting up into this area. Everything's connecting up into here, right? Because it's all bunched up here. So everything's getting pulled up into this area. So every mark that I'm making is going back up into here somewhere, up into here. This one goes up into here. This goes all the way around back up into here, right? And everything is going up that direction. You know, even this stuff is probably going back up this way a bit. And then this thing is going to be even more so doing that. Don't like that last mark. It looks weird having that on both sides equally. Not great. Take that back out. So then if we wanted to spend some time really drawing the hair, we could go back in and design everything kind of around that pattern. It would really kind of help everything. And at that point, once we have this down, say we were drawing from like a live model or something, you know, we could then come in and use that to kind of design the rest of the hair. This looks odd. This looks like a big like caterpillar or something on top of her head. So we can break it up a little bit. I don't know. I guess that's better. You get the idea. We lost a little bit of that structure that it had earlier, right? You want a nice, nice balance of like kind of structural components and more loose kind of organic type components in here. When I went in here and did this over and over, I had lost some of that like structural aspect to it, you know, where it had this like kind of nice shape. And then we need to come in here and just break it up just a little bit more carefully. You know, and let some of that structure show through a little bit. Anyway, it's tough hair to draw. It's very chaotic. You know, so like it would take a while to really design that out, get it looking like just right. Not easy hair to draw. And also we're pretty much out of time. This is getting way too long. So I'm going to probably stop, although I would like to draw the ear real quick. Get a nice shape on there. Oh, more people wrote stuff. Alfonso says he got his paper from Amazon also. I'm curious what kind of paper you guys are getting from Amazon, because when I go look on there, I mean, there's like a million different, well, not a million, but there's like 3 different types of smooth newsprint that I usually see on there. I'm curious which one you guys are buying. Jesse wrote. Oh, I see. Kelsius wrote smooth Strathmore newsprint. 50 sheets. That's good. The Strathmore is a little bit on the rough side, but still usable, right? I mean, I have some here, but I use it more as like backup paper for when I run out, because it's not my favorite type, but it's certainly the more cost-effective type. And it's good. It's good enough. It's a little bit rough, but it works. You know, it'll get the job done. And the Strathmore is okay. And to be honest, the Strathmore is the one that I've noticed is more sensitive to humidity and dryness in the air. And when it gets really dry, it tends to like kind of wrinkle up. And when it gets humid again, but maybe if you're in an environment that's really humid, maybe the opposite happens. I don't really know. I mean, I only know what it's like around here. And around here, well, we live near the beach, so it tends to be like a little bit humid most of the time, even though we're like technically in a desert. But every now and then, man, it gets like really, really dry. Oh, Jesse, what did Jesse write? Found the Strathmore smooth newsprint acceptable, but yeah, sometimes it's bumpy and has more tooth than the other brands Brian mentioned. Still works okay. Jesse, I would agree. The Strathmore, I mean, it's good enough. Like again, like I said, it's a little bit on the rough side, but it's not like so rough that it's unusable at all. It's definitely within the realm of usability for what we're doing here. I used it for a long time. I mean, especially as a student, I used it a lot. And it wasn't until I got more advanced and was teaching a lot and got more picky about it that I was like, I want the good stuff, you know? But you don't have to do that, especially because the other stuff's a lot more expensive. We're just drawing an ear real quick. Real quick, last thing. So keep in mind, right, we've got to get our ear anatomy working properly. So we've got our helix around the outside, anti-helix here on the inside, and the top of the anti-helix has the triangular fossa, which is the top of this little Y-shaped part. We've got the tragus, which is the little flappy part. Then we have the anti-tragus over here, which is the little flappy part across from this flappy part. And down below, we got the lobe, which is the bottom flappy part. A lot of flappy things on ears. And then there's this, of course, this indentation here in the middle, which is like the concha or something. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Aside from that, I mean, we could go in here and maybe map some stuff real quick. I feel like I should do it because it makes the drawing look better, but also this is getting really long and we're kind of out of time. Joseph, thanks for answering our questions. Welcome, Joseph. Thanks for watching the live stream. Appreciate that. Let's see, what else did you write? Where'd it go? Your drawings are looking excellent. I appreciate that. And your content is incredibly insightful. Joseph, thank you. Thank you for hanging out, and thank you for the kind words. Okay, I'm going to do a quick mapping here. I'm not going to talk the whole time because we're running out of time. And this needs to get moving a little bit more quickly. But what I'm really going for here is like a variety of edge. And making edge choices that hopefully inform the drawing in very specific ways. And also adjusting my mapping a little bit here because it doesn't actually fit the way it's supposed to because my drawing's a little bit off. So keep in mind that you might have to do that a little bit. It happens sometimes. Yeah, so we're basically just going in here and figuring out what is in shadow and what is not, and essentially creating shapes accordingly, right? And mapping, partly it's a learning tool. You know, people always ask, like, do you have to do that every time? No, you don't. But what it does is help you understand shape and value. Well, not really value. Shape and edge is really what it focuses on and sets you up to be able to work more with value successfully. And that's really our goal with this. Now this entire eye is in shadow, pretty much the whole thing, right? So not much to map over here. I'm gonna like kind of exaggerate what's happening down here a little bit just to help show that this is the end of the shadow, and this entire eye would be in shadow, right? And we kind of shift down a little bit and say, okay, now we've got kind of the ball of the nose here, right? Which is going to be a nice soft edge. I've got to say, for not being warmed up at all, I think this went okay. At least as okay as could be expected. And it could have been a lot worse, I will say. Get a little cast shadow coming down this way, cutting across here, connecting down into this shape. And then we also have shadow, which is going to be really soft back here, coming down from the nose and then connecting into this shadow here on the cheek. Right, so we basically have like a cast shadow and a form shadow kind of converging right over here, but both are very soft. Top lip, pretty much all in shadow, but then it is casting a shadow down onto the bottom lip, right? And so we're actually picking up a little bit of shadow. It's gonna have a very kind of hard edge right down in here. And then it's kind of coming up over this way, and then cutting out across the lip, and then softening up out here. right? Then we have shadow under the bottom lip. And it kind of continues up this way a little bit, but mostly it just does this, right? Kind of cuts across here. Kind of get that little mentolabial sulcus section in shadow. And it kind of pops back out. And then we get more shadow down on the chin. Just kind of looking like this. Very soft, right? Very rounded form down here. It's, you know, it's a chin. Very round. Kind of drops down a little bit. Now, this is going to be tricky, right? So we've got to get kind of like a nice shadow along here for the jaw. So it starts way up here, starts out pretty soft and gets really soft kind of up in here. We see like a little bit of the muscle, like the, I don't know, masseter muscle, whatever, kind of popping up here a little bit. And then it kind of drops down this way. And you'll notice I'm simplifying this here quite a bit, right? Because this is an area where we don't want to go in and copy what we see. We don't want to go in and copy every little bump. Because when you do that, it's going to age somebody a lot, you know, and she's not like in her 80s, you know, and if we did that, it would look like she was, you know, so like that's something that you see newer students do a lot, which is they really look at the reference really, really hard. And they're like, ah, it goes up this way, and then it goes down a little bit, and then it goes over here. Man, when you're drawing this area, simplify it. I mean, unless you have a reason not to, such as you're intentionally drawing a much older person, like somebody in their 80s or 90s, you know, or something. If you're not, then you're going to want to simplify this section quite a lot, because it will age people really fast. The more little things you put on them, the older they'll look in a drawing, even if it doesn't look that way in the reference. And you're saying, like, yeah, but it's in the reference, I can see it, and it looks good in the photo. It doesn't matter. Like, at the end of the day, we're not making a photo, we're making a drawing. And to make a good drawing, you just got to do what makes a good drawing. And that is not, drawings don't work the same as photos. They work very differently. And so even though we're working from a photo, we can't actually like copy the photo, which is tough. Again, when you're starting out, like you don't know enough to not be able to copy the photo, right? So you're in this weird in-between area where like you have to copy the photo because, you know, otherwise why are you even bothering to work from the photo? And so like at first you have to start out copying the photo and then gradually move away from that and start working towards, you know, figuring out how to invent a little bit more and modify things and change things. And that kind of just comes gradually over time. You know, I mean, it's not something that happens immediately, you know, and especially down in here, right? Like this area, very challenging area. It's going to be very easy to make this look like she's a lot older than she actually is. So we're going to have to come in here and try and figure out how much of this do we want to put in here. And it's possible right now I might draw this and say, nah, that's too much, and then I'm going to pull it out and simplify it a bit more. Although I think this is working okay. But again, if you look at what I just drew versus what's in the reference, I mean, it's pretty different. Very soft edge up in here, right? Because this is a cast shadow from her head, but it's being cast very far. You know, and the only reason we're getting all these little shapes on here is because her head is turned to the side. And so it's kind of like pulling the skin that direction. That's having a big influence on the shapes that we're getting up in there. You know, and then over here we're seeing some shadow, right? This kind of cuts up to here, and then we get some shadow from the ear coming down this way and sort of wrapping around here. Harder edge back here, softer edge back along here. Now, obviously, she has a robe on, and I'm not drawing it. So I'm just, these last few little parts, I'm just making up and trying to make it so that it just completes the drawing and just gives us an ending shape, essentially. Like there's nothing I'm doing there that's based off the reference. All I'm doing is just looking for a nice shape, and that's it. You know, the ear. Get a little bit of shadow up in here. We can lighten it a little bit. And the shadow is going to run basically right up along here. And then it kind of cuts across this triangular fossa section, right? Comes over and up and cuts across this direction. Right, this turns into shadow. We get a little shadow underneath this part. Kind of merges with a shadow. This sort of drops into shadow here. And that kind of merges with a shadow like down and out around here a little bit, which is getting pretty soft. Kind of doing this. Basically it, right? There's like a little bit of shadow under here. It's a little shape. Kind of tucks right up in there. The rest of that is just like shadow down on the bottom of the lobe a little bit. Right? And then this part's, of course, kind of coming up. Wrapping up and over. Dropping back across a little bit. Oh, that was a little too extreme. Pull it back. That seems pretty good, right? It kind of looks like there's shadow along here, but there's not. That's really more like a really dark halftone, you know? And so we'd have to be really careful with that and not let that become shadow. That has to be controlled very carefully. Cool. Anyway, that's pretty much it. I think that's enough. I think we're done. Wayne Jones. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Olivia. Thank you, Wayne. Appreciate it. Thanks for watching. I'm glad everybody stuck it out. This got really long, and that was not my intent. My intent was actually to make this a short one, but it did not work out, apparently. Never does. Once I get going, it is hard to stop. It's weird because it's kind of hard to get going too, you know? Like I'm sure everybody has experienced that to some extent where it's like hard to sit down and start, and then once you start, it's hard to stop. I don't know what is up with that exactly. But in my experience, that has pretty much always been the case. It's hard to tell what parts of her hair are in shadow exactly. But we can add some little shapes real quick. Because it looks odd having the shadows mapped down here and nothing up here. It's a little bit awkward. And I feel like this is going to roll into shadow back around here, right? So we're going to get like a big shadow shape probably like back around here. And maybe it kind of like pops back out a little bit. You know, maybe we get a little bit of shadow like up in here just a little bit. You know, just so it kind of matches what we did down here a little bit better. I'm doing the very quick version of this here. You know, and then obviously this thing's gonna have a little bit of shadow on it somehow. I mean, okay, so she's being lit this way. Her hair is so dark. I mean, honestly, I can't really see exactly what's in shadow there and what's not. So we're just gonna kind of fudge it a little bit here. And maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't. I don't know. Usually what I would do is go in and kind of map the highlights. They're so dark and my screen's kind of smudgy and it's hard to see where they are. I mean, I know they'd be right up in here. In fact, I think they are. I guess we could do it that way. Kind of like up in here. And let's try this again. And then we'll kind of connect them up. And of course, I'm so far up on the page, my hand's hitting this part up here. So if I were to do this right, I would take this off, all this stuff up here. I'm not liking this top part. This is something that I'd have to spend a little bit more time on. It's not the best. Trying to contain it a little bit. It's a little bit too crazy, right? So just throwing in the occasional line, even though it's hair and there's technically no line there, just putting a little bit of a line every now and then is going to help kind of contain it. Anyway, this is it. I'm done. I'm going to stop for real this time. So thank you guys for watching. I really do appreciate it. And there is lots of cool stuff coming soon. I'm not going to be teaching any classes for a little while. That's because we're working on a whole bunch of stuff. And I think sometime in the next 2 or 3 months, it should be available. And I think people will like it. I'm quite sure. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you guys. I appreciate it. Here you go. You can take a look at the final thing here. This is our end result. Not perfect, but not bad. Aside from one eye that's a little bit big and misplaced, I think it went okay. So that's it. That's the end. Celsius, thank you. I appreciate you hanging out. And Joseph also. What did Joseph write?
He said, thanks for answering our
Oh,
questions.
I read that already.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I came back.
Sorry, Joseph.
I came back. Hi, everyone. It's a high
Olivia's
five.
back. She left and went and did real work for a little while.
No, I'm working on the new website.
That's the real work.
It's looking really good.
Good.
But yeah, thanks for watching, everyone.
We got a whole new website coming.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
gonna be pretty cool.
It looks awesome. It's like,
Yes.
if you like the website now, you haven't seen anything yet.
Yeah, well, we don't need to get
Okay,
into
we
it.
don't want to oversell
Yeah.
it, but it's looking
No,
really
it's
cool.
awesome, especially compared to the current website. It's going to be really cool. It's looking good. What I was going to say was the people that made the original website had no idea what they were doing. It was a bit of a disaster.
Well, we hired them, like, we were really new. We had never hired web developers before, so, the whole thing was kind of a learning process. But, it got us to where we are now. Obviously, we have a school and we're running and everything, but, now we can improve the website quite a lot. The designs are much improved, and some of the core aspects of the school are improving as well. So, yeah, we're excited. It's going to be good.
Anyway, that's the end. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for watching. And Brian, do you have any final thoughts? Or if not, I will end the stream.
Nah, you can end it.
Okay.
I've been doing final thoughts for a while now.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, well, goodbye, everyone. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Drink Coca-Cola.